Hi there, I'm Johanna Lee, and today I wanted to talk about three different ways that pivot tables in Google Sheets are different from that in Excel. So as you can see on the screen here, I have a mock data set from Mockaroo, which I'll link in the description if you guys are interested in creating your own data sets. A lot of the things that I do to kind of remember a birthday is to kind of pivot the detail and then filter for the month that is the current month. So I remember to say happy birthday to the people that are important in my life. So this is what that data set represents. And so I do use Google Sheets for this. So the first thing that you're going to do, for those of you that don't know or are unfamiliar with pivot tables, it's very similar to the way that you get into a pivot table in Excel. And what that means is that you click Insert and then you click Pivot Table. And so what it's going to ask you is it's going to say, do you want this pivot table on a new sheet or an existing sheet? And if you click Existing Sheet, it will point to you to where you want actually to put that pivot table. So if I clicked here, it would give me that location and create the pivot table there. So if I click OK and create, it's going to create a pivot table here. But usually most of the time when I'm creating a pivot table, I'm creating it on a new sheet. So this is really similar to Excel. So I have a few videos that I can link above on how you create a pivot table in Excel, but I'll just show you really quick. So what you can do is you can select all with Control A and you can go to the Insert and then Pivot Table here. And so it's very similar in the creation of the pivot table itself, where it's showing you what data you selected, and then the second option is saying do you want it in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet, and say where that is at. All right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click OK here, and you'll be able to see these pivot table fields. So if I do this in Sheets, you'll have a very similar thought process. So Control A to select all the data, Insert Pivot Table, and then click Create for a new sheet. And then so you'll see this pivot table editor is supposed to mirror the same things as your pivot table fields in Excel. And so the one thing that you'll notice is that the default for the view setting in Excel is going to be these 4 tables at the bottom. You can also have it so that if you go to settings, you can have it so that it's located like this. But the first difference that you'll notice in Excel versus Sheets is going to be the boxes and what order they're in. So as you can see on Excel, it's filters, rows, columns, and then values. Whereas when you go to Sheets, it's going to be rows, columns, values, and filters. And so it's a slight nuance, but if you're mirroring an Excel pivot table into Sheets, just make sure that you consider that when you're going into the project itself. I personally like the setup of Sheets better because I think that rows are the most important part of a pivot table, followed by columns, values, and filters, etc. And so that to me makes a little more sense. But just if you're really familiar with the Excel setup, it's going to be slightly different. So that is the first thing that is different with Google Sheets pivot tables. So the second thing is going to be the way that the filters work in the pivot table. And let's take an example here. So what we're looking at is we're looking at first name, and we're also looking at the birthday. So say we put the birthdays above to kind of see and remove the totals, so we can kind of see, this is the ascending order of birthdays in Sheets. And so this top person is the oldest person we know. So there is a filter option here. And so what you can do is you can add a filter. And so I'm going to add a birthday, and this is different from Excel where you can filter by condition. So you can say the date is before or after, and then say that I want the date is after today. And so, that would be an error in the message if someone's birthday is tomorrow. And so hopefully I have nothing in there. And so sure enough, that is the way that works. And so what also I can do is say date is before, in the past year, and click OK and see if I know anyone over the age of 1 year old. So that is what is returning here. And so I think a really cool feature of the Google Sheets Pivot table is this filter condition, and that you can do conditional formatting directly in the pivot table. Normally, the way that you would do that in Excel is you would create a new column that would be the condition, and you would filter on that condition. So if I go back here and I do my first name and my birthdays, and I pull the birthdays into my filter section, what's going to happen here is it's going to, group it as such. So it's going to group it by month, or, the kind of functionality here is that you can select multiple items, but that's really the extent of the conditional formatting within the filters section, right at your fingertips. And so I think that is a really cool feature of Sheets for filtering data within a pivot table. And so that is the second thing that is right off the bat really different from the pivot table in Excel versus Sheets. The third thing that I noticed is that the data that you're using in the pivot table. So the first step that you do to create a pivot table is you select all the data, and then you click create. And so the data that you're working with in a pivot table in Sheets is going to be directly in this pivot table editor. So right in this section here, I'm going to be kind of constantly reminded that this is a 1 through F 1001. But if I go to Excel, what I'll have to do in order to kind of remind myself of like where this data is coming from and what rows it's including, is I'll have to go to change the data source, and just as a reminder. So these pivot tables are exactly the same, A through F 1001. And so I know that from clicking on the change the data source here, but it's not totally apparent right away from the Google Sheets perspective. Google Sheets, the pivot tables, I still don't find super intuitive. I'm kind of learning them as I go and creating them within Sheets. A lot of times when you upload Excel files that you have that are established and are created from a table, you will get an error for the pivot table that is created there. And so, I'm trying to grow my love for pivot tables in Sheets as well. And these are three things that I think are really cool in Sheets that I would like emulated in Excel, but they kind of have a leg up from a Google Sheet perspective. So hopefully this was helpful. I know that it kind of depends on what you're using the data set for. So I hope that you can kind of glean any insights that you have for working with pivot tables from this video. And like I said, hope it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much. Bye.